There we have next guitar up on the bench today. We have the Cort, beautiful Cort Classic Tele. Now this thing is a gorgeous looking guitar. I think it's time to take a flying close-up, eh? Wouldn't you say? Oh shit! Sorry, drops the power. Right, as if we cut it. Here we have Pete's lovely Cort Classic Tele, and this is a full thickness kind of classic Tele feel, although it's got a, well, it's not classic in the sense it's got a belly carve here, but it's got a big chunky, thick chunky Tele feel to it. String through fixing, single coils like a Tele. Controls a little bit different. Three-way front and back switch, knob, volume knob, tone knob. We've got a nut up here which is currently too high, but not too bad. And then we've got a interesting looking headstock, slightly sharp edges under there. We can do away with this horrible string tree there, and we'll replace that with a tusk one. I think a white one would be in keeping. And then we'll see what this nut needs to do. It may actually not need to come out at all if it's, you know, if it's in good working order. So Pete's brought this over. This is I forgot to say, this is a Manson version. So it's obviously produced in Cahoots with Manson in Exeter. Nice little mini button tuners, unbranded. They've got the plastic still on the back, which not to my liking. I'd take it off. But now what they have here is, just picked it up, there's a funny, I'm completely mad. There's a little imperfection here in the neck. I don't know if it's a dent or something, but I can just feel it. It's not the end of the world, but it's just a very small thing. My fingers are very sensitive to that. Okay, so everything about this looks great. I think the frets felt a little bit sharp the other day. Don't know what this wood is. It's not rosewood, of course. I'm not even sure it's not Pau Ferro. It's something else. There'll be some clever name for it. But I don't know, and I can't look it up just now. So we've got a first fret action that's too high by a mile. We've got a last fret action that's too high by quite some distance. And on top of that, to be so high, it's also got the stilts, you know, those things, saddles up on their hind legs, which doesn't feel so great. What it has got is a nice rotary adjuster wheel there, which is fabulous. Addition to any guitar. I'm all for that because it means it's adjustable without taking the neck off, unlike the Fender I've just finished doing, which you of course have to take apart in order to make an adjustment. And of course, if you make an adjustment on the Fender with the heel mounted that thing, truss rod adjuster, the problem is you have to guess it, because then you have to put strings or put the neck back in and then hope you've got the right amount of adjustment, and it's really trial and error. So this has already got a tusk nut of sorts. Now I think I'm going to go on the old-fashioned if it ain't broke don't fix it principle. I had already talked about an adjustable nut, but I don't know, it's one of those things I kind of half a mind. If it doesn't need it, don't do it. Don't change it just for the hell of it. What we want is a guitar that stays and plays in tune, and if I can assess this, and if I'm confident that this will stay in tune, then I don't think we should force any adjustments to it that aren't strictly necessary. So what I want to do first is get me a fine thingy. I'll just slap off the B and the E, and I'm going to take off the metal string tree. They're not bad, these little things, but at the same time they're still metal, and I don't really, for the sake of a £6 for a 6 squid, one of these and to enjoy the advantages of tusk. It seems to me a better choice, because we're after tuning stability most of all. Let's make sure this fits okay. Yep. Now what I don't know is whether that's cut properly or not. It looks a little bit flat in and this one looks almost straight through. See, there's almost no these are all the same, these little devils. That string is almost completely flat over the whatever that thing's called, straight thing, bridge, and we can sort of judge it by running this. Well, it's not totally flat, but it's pretty angle free. Now let's do it this way. Let's set this on there. Well, that's not entirely true. It's what, how many degrees? Yeah, keep it still for a minute. So, blimey, 1/2 a degree. What I also don't know is it's possible to tell just from this is what the angle, if any, on that slot is. If there is no angle, then the chances are this string is sitting flat in the slot. Feels fairly dead to me. I would be tempted on this one to put a second tree in, just because that's not very good. Okay, well, let's just hold off for a second. Right, well, what we're going to have to do, I would do, is, as far as this goes, we've got the option to replace the nut. That's the first thing. And if we replace the nut, we can certainly make sure that the angle of the slot is correct. So I'm going to start by, let's just start in the normal direction of things. Okay, let's check the neck relief first. So I'll get my capo off here and then just check the relief. That is actually about 0.25, right on the mark, so that's okay. So what I'll do now is I'll just drop off these top strings, and then I'm just going to measure the height, and that's quite a bit. That's about 0.6, something like that, when all's said and done. And I think that's a 0.6 there. Let's try that one. Yeah, so we're about 0.7 over the first fret there, which is way too high. And the result of that will be that the notes will go sharp. When you play down here, notes will go sharp. But also, it's much harder to play than it needs to be. It'll be tiring, left-handed wise. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start cutting this slot, but I'm going to open it out with a very distinct downward trajectory. And what I want to make sure is we're going to cut it downwards a little bit, but we also want it to sit right on the end here, and we want the rest to be underneath, dropping away. So the problem is that since we have so little in the way of angle, a break angle over here at this point in time, I won't really gain any effect from this, hardly, or it would be difficult to notice any. So the chances are, before we get to the right height, we're in danger of cutting down onto the wood, but I still can get there with an angle. Just keep my eye on the wood. It's amazing how much further than the factory setting you end up being able to go, or needing to go, to get a low action. So all of the material above this nut above this string at the moment is superfluous. And so what they do is they put a nut in and they put the strings in so that they sit in little shallow grooves, and it looks good, and that's the end of the process as far as the factory is concerned. But the point is, it's not about how it looks, it's about ending up with a first fret action which is a good height to stay and play in tune. So I can see that there's about 2 mils of nut material above unnecessary material, which I will take off, above this string. And what we'll find is that when we get down to it, the amount of nut physically needed in this slot is actually tiny. All right, but I think that's at a good height there, so I'm going to stop that one. I'm going to just do this one up. I'm going to measure and cut. A little bit difficult because this is hooked under there. So again, same thing here now. I'm just going to open the slot up. So instead of being a tall, narrow, high, straight-sided, straight-walled slot, I'm making it into more of a V shape. And one of the things about that, which upsets purists, but actually a V shape will, by definition, grip the string a lot less than a straight-walled, tight slot will. And not least because, as I've pointed out in a few videos, when we think we're making a straight line with our nut files, they never cut a straight line. They almost always wiggle to some degree because they're very thin. Unless we have something like maybe the Hosco. I'm thinking of getting the Hosco files, which might be just a little bit easier again than this one. But generally, they end up wiggling, and you get a kind of slightly curved slot running from front to back, and because of that, your clearance that you had for your string disappears. Okay. Now this perhaps I could have taken this down a little bit before I did that, because my advice is always to adjust your gross variables first, so I probably should have taken these down, and it'll serve me right if I take these down, because they're fairly far out of adjustment as far as I would be concerned. So if I take them down, what will happen straight away is that the nut slot first fret action gap will decrease. So let's just try and get these down to a sort of workable action first at this end. Too much. Even still, these saddles are still quite high up on their back legs, which is an unusual position. It's not ideal really for this, I wouldn't say. So we've got just over 1.5. We've got just on 1.5. That's good. 1.5, good. Just over 1.5. Yeah, so you really wouldn't want these pointing upwards like ski slopes, really, which is currently what it's doing. So it sort of suggests to me that this neck might benefit, or ideally might have benefited from a shim, so that we don't have to have these pushed up so far. Sorry, not a shim, the other way around, or lowering the pocket slightly. Alright, we're on there, that's good. That one's too high. Yeah, so that's the interesting bit. It's all sitting slightly wrong. Not the end of the world, but it just shows that sometimes the factory gets the geometry a little bit wrong, which I think might be the case here. Okay. So I'm just taking all this down to a bit of a closer action. There's no reason, looking at the fairly flat radius here, there's no reason why this guitar shouldn't play with a really low action, or the kind that Pete wants. So we could be easily looking at 1.2 there, turn a little bit more there. So down a bit there, up a bit there. Okay, so check the gaps, check the gaps. That's pretty close. We'll just widen the slot out again. So I should have said as a rule, if I'm paying attention to my own rules, I recommend taking care of the gross variables first, the ones that are most out. The whole of the action setting thing is a little bit of a toing and froing process because they're interdependent. The first fret, last fret and neck relief, those three components are interdependent or interrelated. So yeah, you end up kind of getting closer and closer and then finally stopping at the point you want to be. But as a word of advice, go for your ones that are grossly out to begin with and get them down a little closer to where you want to be. And then you sort of move in on the fine details. So this is still a little bit over 0.3. You can tell that because it's still happily playing when I'm putting the feeler gauge underneath. Now it's actually gone down just to the right level there and it starts to dirty the note up. You can hear it zinging. But we're pretty much on the mark here actually. So the thing about this is that I won't fit an adjustable tusk nut if there is no, if this one works really well, and it is tusk, that's for sure. I mean tusk Cort has used a good quality material, so there's no massive, there's only a very small benefit from taking this one out and replacing it with an adjustable one. And the benefit, I would say, is that we'd be replacing these hand cut slots with factory cut slots, which are a very tiny bit smoother. And I, where I can, I like to use those because, why not have the best of all worlds? We can bring the nut, the first fret action to the perfect action, and keep the factory made slots. That's a good outcome. But in this case, we've already got a nut fitted. It's too high to begin with, which gives us plenty of room to make all the adjustments I need to make. And it'll save Pete 25 quid or something. Yeah, 15 quid difference. I charge less for the adjustable nut on a Strat style guitar. Partly I don't charge a full price of all the labour that goes into doing an adjustable one. It's partly because it saves me time and effort as well. So I think I'm benefiting from it, so I don't charge a huge amount more. So it's much easier than spending time cutting slots downwards. But in this case, it will save a bit of money to reuse this, and there won't be any negative effect of it because it'll be this will keep really good tune. If I notice that it doesn't for any reason, then I will revert and we will change it out. So we're a little bit above all of these, so it's still fairly high, so a safety margin. But it's amazing when you bring them down to the ideal first fret action, which is where there's hardly any gap left, as I'm testing for now. And when you get down there, when you see actually how much nut is left needed, it's an incredibly small amount, and you end up with just almost a wafer thin nut See, I've got some space there. That's a bit closer to that. D is still too tall. Yeah. So really what it means is the majority, the bulk of your nut is unnecessary. That's good. Now, what the impression you'll get when you when Pete plays this will be how light the whole thing is to play. So what I'll do, my back hurts. What I'll do now is, if I can find where it's gone. There it is. Let's just tune it up a minute. What I'm going to do is, just for the bottom part of each of these nut slots, I'm just going to, because I'm concerned about the angle over the fret, over the nut of these, particularly the G and the D, I'm going to go over all of them and just cut backwards a little bit, just to make sure that we guarantee as much as possible that the angle is correct. It's very difficult to do this without clipping the rosewood on when you have a low action like this. Especially the guitars where there's rosewood behind here just are not made to take a low action. It's as simple as that. You can't really do it, but you can try. You just have to kind of recognise that you're going to clunk into the wood at some point. So best you can do. If it sort of had a gap behind it, a bit like a Les Paul nut, then you wouldn't have the same problem really. You could just cut down and ensure that the string angle was good. But you don't. So you can see if I'm not careful, it will straight away. As soon as we try and make this slope as good as it can be, we end up clunking into the wood. Nicely in tune. Now I'm listening out at this point to hear how this goes, because if there's anything about this nut that I don't like, not bad actually, but if there's anything about it I don't like, it'll go. Right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some filing sticks, probably not the right word, sanding sticks. I'm going to, while I'm at it, I'm going to sand off these here, this material. So the unnecessary surplus tusk, or new bone, or whatever Cort calls it, I'm taking it away because it's not needed. it's surplus and it's just basically sticks up and gets in the way and looks a little bit on the ugly side. Of course, what you end up left with is an incredibly low nut. You can see I'm getting rid of a bit of it. And we can actually keep going. There's quite a lot to still remove here. Now I can afford to hit the strings here if necessary, because I don't really want to break them, but I don't have to be too precious. So you can hear in a minute, or I heard just then when the sandpaper hit the string windings. If I went too far, it would go twang and break. Okay, so this is just to begin with. It's still got some furry bits everywhere, and I could still take some more off. There's still a fair bit of spare material here. So what I'm doing is I'm just clearing the bulk of it so that I can polish the rest a little bit later when the strings are out of the slots. And then we'll check, next step is we'll check the playing action up here, make sure all the notes we want to play and see what the limitations are, because this came at a high action, as you probably saw. This is good. I'm impressed actually. So far, so good. Oof, dear. Right, what I'm getting is the stringing technique isn't the best help. I pulled a load of slack out there on and there, and the way it's tied up. So I want. Well, there you go. That's not so good either. What I would like you to do, Pete, when the time comes, is I'd like you to look at my restringing approach and see if that works better. This is picking up holding far too much slack. Now these are elixirs, but I'm going to just get a 46 string from somewhere for the time being to use for the fret leveling, or if we need any fret leveling, we may actually not. Oh look, I happen to have an elixir here for what it's worth. It's just a coincidence, it's a spare string. That's kind of convenient, really. Yeah, so what I just did there is I pulled out a load of slack from your windings. So whatever you've done there with this little knot thing, it's not ideal. It's not very good for keeping the string, or keeping the string in tune. So I would recommend that you reconsider that. I don't have enough hands to stick that to, but what I'm doing here is I put the string all the way through like this, pull it tight, pull it back 1 fret's worth, hold it there, start winding on, hold the tight string, held string over the loose one, and as it comes round, push held string under the loose one, so the loose one, and pull it up and it goes above. Those two little moves create a sort of locking arrangement with fairly minimal amount of string on the post, and it's a predictable amount that you can stretch out, but without the thing breaking. Something about the way you've wrapped them on puts a little kink in it as well, which made these break, which don't normally break when I'm stretching that much. So all of that detuning that came out there when I stretched it, all of that will come out throughout your playing and keep the guitar going out of tune the whole time. Right, so we will take care of that when we restring it. So the thing to do now is just recheck. The relief is good, it's where I want it to be. I've set the action a little bit lower down here so it's correct, or it's fairly low over the last fret here, which is how I like it. You're lucky in the sense you've got a very flat radius here, so this is amenable to not choking out on the bends for a very low action. So flat radius is good for low action and preserving your bends without choking. So what I'm just going to do now is we're just going to check the notes. Don't expect to hear any buzzing in the first half of the neck. If you do hear it, it's usually a sign that your neck is either too flat or more likely backbowed. Tiny little bit of something there. Tiny amounts. Little bit. A little bit of fret slap here. A little bit on the low E as well. Okay, some on the, not bad, but still will need doing. It's on the A and the E particularly starting to get fret slap down here. But the banana fret leveling technique will cure that, which is great. Now, judgment on the nut. It's fitted beautifully. It's tusk. It's cut to the right level. I've still got a little bit of trimming. Once we take the strings off, there's still more we can take off there. Really, I honestly think we can. I think we can leave this on. You know, I don't think save a bit of money. If it's not broke, let's not fix it. The better, investment is putting the tusk nut on a tusk string tree on there to go with this tusk nut. I'll keep an eye on it, and if anything about it holds the strings or gets in the way, I will then change it out. But I don't think it needs it. There's no point spending money if it isn't necessary. Okay, so what I want right now, I can't find it again. So I'm going to mark up the frets. Pretty good on the treble side, I would say. It's a well-made guitar by the looks of it, but we do have a bit of fret slap. Now, fret slap is a term that I've kind of made up to distinguish from fret buzz. So fret buzz, when I use it, I mean a specific localized buzzing you get when playing a note, because the note you're trying to play has an unusually high fret in front of it that immediately gets in its way, and so that note is struggling to play because of that particular high fret. And so you'll find fret buzz appears in a certain place. Usually you see it mapped across more than one string, but it'll be restricted to one fret here and another one maybe further down somewhere, but it's localized. With this guitar, there isn't any specific fret buzz. What there is though is this fret slap as we get onto the low E and the A, progressively until we get to the low E. And what I call fret slap is a situation where it's not a single uneven fret, it's all together. There's not quite enough room for the strings to move at the action this is currently at, which isn't unbelievably low, to be honest. It's low, but it's not stupid low. Now, fret slap is, I didn't used to think that the banana fret leveling file would deal with fret slap. I knew it dealt very well with fret buzz. Shall we use this one? Yeah, let's use the U channel file. I knew the tool would deal with fret buzz, take down individual frets, the high frets, but I didn't think it would work very well with the fret buzz. And they used to be of a mind that fret buzz was only really solvable by lowering the action. You kind of had to resign yourself to that. I've since really discovered that, in fact, this banana leveling method is a little bit more elegant than even I thought it was. So that while leveling out any uneven frets, this tool also gently scoops out any irregularities in the fretboard. And there are irregularities in the fretboard which rob it of the clearance, or rob the strings of the clearance they need to swing. And it only is a tiny amount that makes the difference. But once we level very lightly with this, it's this curve on the banana tool, or the fret file, or whatever we call it, is a much more idealized curve than the actual curve on the neck, because we're sampling the neck in 3 places, and we're telling this truss rod to bend uniformly in response to, or whilst mapped against those 3 points. And as a result, you get a smoother curve on your file, your banana file, than you do in the actual neck itself. And that's quite interesting, because if you think of this as a slightly rugged, bumpy seabed, then a smooth curve comes into that, which broadly mirrors the overall curve of it, but is smoother than the little individual localized bumpy bits. The whole curve, the ideal curve on here, reaches into that slightly irregular shape and clears it out. And it only does a tiny amount of work, and it only has to do a tiny amount of work before it's cleaned up those irregularities. Now, I'm not really expecting to spend much time there, because I know that this end, or this part of the fretboard is, this side of the neck, the treble side, I know is played pretty well just now. It's the bass side I want to hear this do its clearing up work on. So I'm not really pressing very hard with this truss rod at all. I'm sort of mostly using it under gravity. I can see it's cutting almost everything, except there's one there it's not touching at all, and one there, and those are low frets. Now the interesting thing about low frets is, if they're bad enough, what happens is when you play on the low fret, that next one will be relatively high, and it will cleaner, struggling. Not so bad, I would carry on leveling a bit, but you can just tell. So the low frets, in a way, dictate what's possible. They really are the determinants of the neck, because a high fret on its own, in amongst a bunch of otherwise relatively even frets, the high fret is sort of easy to take down. You kind of, your file will, your leveling beam will do that. When you find a low fret, or a couple of low frets, they still have the same effect, i.e. they make the next fret relatively high and cause buzz, but they're harder to get rid of, because you have to then bring everything else down to bottom out the low fret in order to clear up the relative unevenness. So that becomes a different matter altogether. Instead of sanding down one high fret, you're suddenly sanding down a whole rack of frets to bottom out a low spot, which is both costly and nerve-wracking. So the tiny little bit in the middle of the neck there, which I will focus on right now. But yeah, so it's quite interesting that how the low frets sort of set what's possible, dictate what's possible. But again, this tool very gently ekes out, levels everything down to bottom out a significantly low fret. Now, when I say significantly, it's a microscopic measurement, but it's enough we're dealing with such small measurements in this playing arrangement that it only takes that tiny amount to cause something to buzz and not play the way you want. So we really don't have lots of space to deal with. It's such tiny clearances. But on the plus side, it means that before too long, you can level out or bottom out a low fret. This one is standout low fret. Everything else is getting hit fairly heavily with the file and the cutting the paper. And I'd say actually that one there, and that one there are untouched, so they are still lower than all the others. It's a little better. It's still got a tiny bit of slap across various frets. So I'm just going to concentrate on this end a little bit. And you see I'm going side to side a little bit, so I'm kind of spreading the cutting power out so that it sort of blends into the previous one. I don't do, you know, hard segments. So I keep seeing there's a StewMac catalogue that keeps flashing up on my computer. It keeps showing me their products, and I love StewMac stuff. I mean, it's good quality. They've got something for everything, that's for sure. But there are some things that totally amaze me, and one of them is it keeps showing me what it calls a diamond fret leveling file, and it shows it sitting on the frets. I'm not kidding you, it's as wide as this little flat metal, you know, thing with diamond coating, and they show it sitting on the frets like this. The idea is you're supposed to take this diamond coating thing and go and level your frets. I can't believe that they would recommend leveling your frets with something that wide. Because if you think about it, your frets have a radius like this, and this doesn't. It's flat. And all it's going to do is want to basically carve off that radius and flatten it out, which strikes me as a wholly undesirable thing. What I like about this method is that it's a thin cross section, you know, a very thin segment, so you're kind of following the curve with this thin tool, not imposing a flat, great big flat plate shape onto the fingerboard, fretboard. Mostly, tiny bit down there, not quite sure why just there, but so we're almost there with the A. That's good. I'm going to concentrate a little bit down at this end on the A track. See if we can just solve that problem. So for something that started out looking pretty good, you know, this is the way to really improve that bit of residual fret slap, the stuff that's all the way up the neck for that action, that chosen action. So now I'm sort of rolling this towards the edge a little bit, letting it come back on towards the A, rolling it extremely towards the edge a bit. And so we're hoping that this leveling will clear up the fret slap over here, which it has, almost. It's better. It's better at this end. Needs a bit more work concentrating at this end. So I'm just going to kind of focus on getting all of these. Of course, the thing is, remember, you're working on much closer together frets, so the cutting power is sort of reduced at this end because it's being supported by a whole raft of frets. Down here it will cut it more easily because there's only one or two more sparsely spaced out frets. A bit like when you're doing the edge beveling and you've done a refret, cutting this end where it's all clustered together with lots of frets takes longer. That's all beautifully out of tune. Let's see if I can tune it up for a minute. Tuna flirt. Now at this point I'm listening to how this goes into tune. Tell me how the nut is. Fingers go black. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Okay, well, we've done that bit, so time to get the strings off. Now I'll tidy up the nut. I'll keep these strings as a spare set of, ooh, don't like that tied up business. I'm sorry. I tell you what, I'm not just being funny, Pete. I think what's happening is when you do that little hook round business, I think it also, well, first of all, it makes it now difficult for me to get them off, which is a bit of a pain. But more than that, I think it prevents them stretching out fully. Something about it holds it, kind of prevents it from pulling all the way. See, and that breaks as well. Look how, see, that broke as well. So you're going to be much more likely to be on a break because of this stringing technique. I'll try and set up a little close up. Oh no, this double through thing, locking thing is not good. Definitely not. You see the kind of hassle it's going to create to undo them. And there's no real, I promise you, there's no real advantage. In fact, if anything, you're overstressing the string. That crimp on the string is likely to make it break. So, and I end up having to cut it or getting it stuck in my finger. So I want to convert you away from that if I can, please. So I'm not going to keep these strings because of the gnarly stuff at the end here. And this is the point at which I usually go and try and untangle this, and I usually end up getting bitten by the string. I didn't this time. Right, you're getting chopped off strings for being wickedly naughty, locked off strings. Your bad master has insisted on doing. So what we've got now is a set of frets with slight flat surfaces on the top of them too, in order to get them level. We have to take some of the material off, which ends up with a slightly flat spot. Now, oh Jesus Christ! Oh, sorry, but I hate that kind of stringing. Ends up with blood swimming out my fingers. Right. Right. Yes, anyway, so yeah, we've got flat spots on top now, and what we need to do is to round them off with a file called the crowning file, which is designed to wear off the shoulders or the corners of these flat spots, to round them off a little bit so that the fret resumes its arch shape, which is what we really want. Now with this file, what we'll aim to do is we've put the marker pen on there, And the reason I do that is so that I have a guide that lets me see, make sure that I'm not touching the top of the fret. I just want to cut back the sides where it's flattened. And so I'm watching and I'm leaving a very thin line of black marker pen on the top. Basically, my aim is to get that as thin as possible, but not remove it. Because if I leave that little thin line of marker pen as thin as I can do, it means I've rounded off the fret, but I've left it at the same height as at the end of the fret leveling process. And that's really the whole point of this. We don't want to lose the relative levelness that we got in the fret leveling. So, oops, it falls off the fingerboard. So you can see it moves along fairly quickly. The old-fashioned way of doing this takes about 3 times longer, but it is a very satisfying method. It uses a 3-sided file, which I've got over in one of the pots over there. Now, actually, funnily enough, it's slightly more accurate than this tool. The tool is really does an adequate job, perfectly good job, but much quicker, which is obviously why it's attractive to use. Yeah, ultimately you can end up with a finer black line using the old-fashioned method, but it takes you longer. But hey, you know, what's 3 times not much? Still not that much. And so I'm cleaning out the diamond surface with this wire brush as I go, because the marker pen tends to clog it out a little bit. Can do without that. Right, nearly there. Okay, well, I've got quite a long way today in terms of making up the three adjustable nuts, two of which are going to get used on customer guitars, but one of which is going to go off to Gerard to be a living prototype for him to, or I suppose what do they call it, reverse engineer, when you give somebody a working thing and they sort of they work out from that the blueprints, how it was made, starting with the actual finished working product. So that's the plan. I'm going to have to put a note on it saying, do please send it back to me afterwards, because it's worth 25-30 quid to me. Okay, so now what I've got is I have taken off the sharp shoulders, and while I'm at it now, it's probably a good time to clear up some of the dust, just get rid of it, and with it some of the marker pen as well, so it sort of partly cleans it up. Sometimes it leaves a little bit later, but we get that off when we oil it. Okay, so that's the fret leveling done. Cleaned up that fret slap, so it gives you a low action without the fret slap that it had. I think one of the interesting things to note is that, and I think it's one of the things I found that I needed to say more and more to people, is there are some limitations to playing action that you simply can't overcome, no matter how much. And it doesn't matter, it's not a matter of guitar tech skill or not. So one of them is the constraints imposed by a type radius fingerboard. So a 7.25mm radius fretboard or fingerboard actually cannot be set as low as a 9.5 or ideally 12 and above. So the flatter it is, like this neck here, the lower you can get away with setting your action. And that's a lot to do with the geometry of the neck, or the geometry of that particular radius. So when you have a tight radius and you're bending a string from one part of the radius upwards across over the hill on the fret, if you like, so from the E track up onto the G, usually, track, you're pushing it uphill. If you're just thinking about it, looking at it end on, you're pushing it from down here up the hill. If you didn't see this length, you just saw a dot, like a little ball moving. It's going from down here to up to the top of the fret. And it's that movement uphill. So if we're bending a note, the E is down there, physically down there. We bend it upwards to the top of the hill of the fret, and then the anchor point is down here again, further down the bottom of the hill. So what you get is a kind of up and down movement, and that puts the next frets in the way, because this string is going down lower than this part of the fret. So it's cutting a diagonal across. So that's one of the constraints that you simply cannot overcome. And it took me a long while to realise that, and I found myself a number of times trying to level my way around it, thinking I could do it if I just kept on leveling. I would eventually get there, and actually eventually I had to wise up to that limitation and realise that there's simply no way I was going to get there, and I would just be spending the rest of my days wasting fret metal trying to get somewhere that wasn't possible. So I sort of learned that before that was too late, which was a good thing, never a bad thing. Let's get some 400 grit, shall we? Yeah, so I figured that out just in time. 600, 400. That's one of the limitations. What's the other one? Yeah, the other one is the whole thing of how you strike the strings. So the fact is that heavy hitting requires more room for the strings to move, and that's just a fact of life. There's no way around that system, that limitation either. So it just means no matter how good I am with my technique, or however good your guitar tech is, if you're a heavy hitter rhythm guitar player, you cannot have the same ultra low action pound for pound as if you weren't, and that's just something you're going to have to accept. And you know, there's no point crying about it. It's just going to be a bare, brutal fact. The strings need room to spin around, and then the harder you hit them, the more room they require. Yeah, there's no getting around it. So those are the two principal ones that I have to convince people or remind people that there's no way around it. And those are two things I was glad that I finally learned, because I would spend quite a lot of time and effort trying to level down to a place that it just simply wasn't possible to get to, but I hadn't realised it. So it was kind of counterproductive. A waste of time, that's another way of putting it. Anyway, yes, so that is a very definite limitation. So now what we've got is we've got the frets levelled out, the nut cut to the right height, and also reduced and lowered, so that there's no excess or very little excess material on there that doesn't need to be on there. The next thing we have to do now is a bit of a sort of off-camera thing, which is I'm going to need to polish out some oil or something on here. I'm going to polish out the frets. So right now they have 300 grit type scratching on them, 400 grit from the fret leveling tool, 300 from the crowning file, and so to make them smooth we need to polish them out, and that will take several grades of sandpaper, ending up with micro mesh paper as well, to make it to get to the final sanding stage. So that's the aim. There's my thing, that, and that. Okay, so I'll cut myself some paper, but the first thing I'll do is I will mask off the whole of this fretboard. Now let me just have a quick look while we're at it if I remember rightly, I thought these were a little bit sharp, but actually, you know what? They aren't that bad. What I can do, just to be on the safe side, or safe side, something side, I might just run a little bit of, what grit have we got here? 180? That's 120. There's the 180. Where's the 180? There's a 180 somewhere. Maybe, there's 180, right. So I'm run some 180 down the edge just to make sure that it's not going to scratch us at all. So this is a sort of, it does two things. It just softens off the end of the frets a little bit, and it just rolls over the fretboard a tiny little bit as well. And keeping it very high above the paint job of the finish. Okay, and then I'll do it on this side, but what I want to do is just cover this off. You can do it by taking the neck off, and then you don't have to worry of going anywhere near the paint. In this case, I'll just protect it this way, so I don't have to worry about slips. Cover that off. Keep treading on broken strings down there at the moment. Get to clean up soon. Okay, I'll do the rest in, what's that word? Masking tape, regular cheap masking tape. I'll just go down on this side as well. And then what I'll also do is, as we sand out the frets generally, I will include these fret ends in that sanding process so that we continue to soften them off as much as is humanely possible. Okay, and the other thing you can do, another little trick if you want to, is roll up a little bundle, little tube of sandpaper, and kind of, as long as it's a little bit flexible, maybe not too tight, what you want to do is run it up and down the edge of the frets like this, and that sort of curved surface drops in and around the sharp edge of the frets. It just helps to round them off a little bit. Do the same on this side. Not a good view. Again, this is 180, so the next one we'll use on the edge here is 400. I'll do that now. So you don't need to stop and do it separately. You go over there. Where did my 400 go? There it is. 400. Yes. So, spring is nearly here, ladies and gentlemen. How cool is that? Can't wait for the sun to come out and stay out a bit longer. It's lovely and sunny today, but come April and early May, it's going to be hammock time. Good book, cold drink, swinging in the hammock. Okay, so that was sort of going over with 180 and then 400, and then the rest I will include or sort of incorporate the fret ends in the rest of the sanding process. So now I'm going to do a sort of long, drawn out, covering everything in masking tape process, which kind of looks a bit like this. What I end up doing is I put all the bits on that I can do at this size bits, and then where it has to be cut, I end up getting a board and doing it on the board. And we get as far as we can with full size strips. Okay, so I'll go off, and I think what I'll do is I'll come back when I've done all the polishing out, including a trip around it with a Dremel and some Autosol chrome cleaner on the frets. When that's all shined up beautifully nicely, I will oil the fretboard, fingerboard, sorry, and I'll come back ready to restring it. I mean, it's an interesting one because I think the nut is perfectly good to leave as is, simply because it keeps tune. As I've said on all my videos, my experience has shown me that tuners have next to nothing to do with tuning, keeping tuning. They have to do with turning the knob and putting the guitar into tune, that's for sure. But in terms of tuning stability, they don't play a part. And that seems really counterintuitive, but it's what I found. So some people kind of, when the guitar won't stay in tune, they resort to, or they get encouraged by people perhaps who don't really understand, who suggest spending more money on tuners. And of course you can do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. When you spend more money on tuners, you will get tuners that are smoother to operate, and that's not a bad thing at all. They're more precise in their micro, fine-tuning adjustments, but they won't stop the guitar going out of tune. The guitar goes out of tune for two principal reasons. Firstly, the nut slots being the wrong material, maybe plastic or something sticky, and because the fret slots are the wrong material and they're tight or not cut well, in which case you'll end up with a differential in tension either side of the nut, because it holds the string. It sort of keeps it and holds it there, and then it will let go of the string when you put more load onto it, like when you bend it. And it's not, some people kind of want to think it's something to do with your bending. You bend the note and it pulls slack or unwinds the tuner posts or something. Well, it doesn't. What it does is it pulls through a tiny amount of string that previously was held in a differential of tension on one side or other of the nut, and it's the undoing of that and the pulling through of the string that makes the thing go out of tune. So people often think it's something to do with the tuner itself coming unravelled, but I promise you it ain't. So I recommend you take care of, think of it, even if you don't totally believe me, think of it as 50% nut slots, 50% slack in your strings. And to get the slack out of your strings, it will have to do with how you tie them up in the first place. So follow carefully what I showed at the end of this. I think it's going to be better than that locked off thing you were doing before, Pete. And then really it comes down to how thoroughly you wring out the unreleased slack once you put the new strings on. And it can take as much as half an hour to do it properly. But the rule is you just do it until there's no more slack to be pulled out, and that, only then will it be stable, as long as your nut slots are good. You get those two things right, that's to all intents and purposes, that's 100% of your tuning and stability taken care of. And it's interesting that legend has it that Strat bridges put the guitar out of tune, and Strat bridges don't put the guitar out of tune. What Strat bridges, tremolo bridges do, is that they will find the slack in your system and bleed it out, which is what puts your guitar out of tune. So it's the slack that puts it out of tune. The tremolo bridge helps it, but it isn't the tremolo bridge per se, and people mistakenly think it is, and they blame the tremolo bridge and they shut it down and never use it. And that's a shame, really, because it's actually, as long as you get the other two things I said, which is the slack taken out of your strings and you get the nut slots right, you can use a 6-screw Strat tremolo all day long without it going out of tune. So, you know, it's worth knowing that. And then, you know, if you sort of figure it out and you've worked to that, then you'll enjoy stable tuning. You'll have the secret. Give me the secret of man's red fire so I can be like you. Oh no, I've quoted some copyrighted lyrics. Oh god, I'm going to get sued by Disney. Are you allowed to say Disney, or is that word copyrighted? Can't be. I've got a friend called Disney. That's his real name. Big up Matthias, the king of the tree surveys. Great scientist, takes after his father, in his father's footsteps. His father was a significant British astronomer of the 60s, 70s and 80s, I would say. And Matthias, his son, has gone on to be, well, he was first as an expert or a PhD student. I think he was in remote sensing sciences, and then he sort of developed or expanded that into mapping biomass using LiDAR, which is some sort of, I don't even know what the acronym is, but it's something radar that's used for surveying and builds up three-dimensional pictures of forests and all the biomass that's above ground, I believe. Anyway, that's a person I know called Disney. There you are. King of the trees. I think Matthias did a program with Judi Dench about trees. So if you ever see anything on the TV to do with these three-dimensional, beautiful pinpoint maps of, or 3D mapping of tree structures in the forest, that will be Matthias and his team. And you think, I know that bloke. Sam talked about him on one of his guitar videos. Long time ago. Anyway, so I wasn't planning to take you through this process, but since I'm there and it's too much trouble to turn the cameras off just yet, might be one that I just carry on and do it the whole way through. I tend to, it's a bit too thin and spindly, I tend to turn the camera off because the sanding part is a fiddly load of, or a noisy load of scratching and scraping with sandpaper sheets, which is not that entertaining. Not that any of the rest of this is. Anyway, so that's too thin as well. Come on, give me some thicker bits for you. Thank you. So, the world, isn't it a weird place? But Mars, isn't it a brilliant place? It's magic, isn't it? Mars. Video, actual video from Mars, man. That's fantastic. Never seen anything like it. I've been an Apollo freak since I was a kid, and I saw it live one night. My foster mum, who I lived with in Devon, funnily enough, where I've ended up back, but I remember on the night of the Apollo 11 landing, she walked us kids across the fields to some nearby farm or something where they had a TV. And of course that was a rare and exotic thing, but you did that on that sort of day because there was only likely to be or more in the end, but you didn't know if you'd ever see that kind of history repeated ever again. So I think she really took on board the import of the moment, shall we say. And so dragged us, kids probably protesting, who knows, but dragged us across the fields in Devon. And I have in my mind's eye, as we went across the fields to these neighbours, I kind of seem to remember looking up at the moon and being very, very aware of what the significance of this thing was. It sounds a bit grown up for a 6-year-old kid, really, so maybe I didn't really think that at all, and I'm just making it up, giving myself delusions of adulthood that I didn't have. But I do remember sort of being, I think I remember being very tired, and I don't really remember that much of what it actually looked like, other than I've seen it a million times since, so I do know what it looks like. But I think it did stay with me, that memory of the excitement of it and the otherworldliness of it. And I can't separate out what she did by taking us across and making it that important, and how different it would have been had she not. Maybe I would have got a different message about science and exploration, and maybe I wouldn't be excited about it today. This is so hard. But she did, and I am to this day thrilled by space exploration, interplanetary stuff, and landing on other worlds, which completely and utterly tickles my brains. There's nothing quite as mind-blowing as when you see an actual rock, or a billion rocks lying there on Mars, and you know that they are reachable, outable and touchable, and yet you also know that they've sat there in exactly that place for countless millions of years, since what? Since they were thrown out by some volcano somewhere. Whatever it was that chucked them there, they landed one time millions and millions of years ago. And then they stopped rolling. They might have rolled for however long it took boulders to roll once they'd been spat out of some volcano. And then they stopped rolling, and then they stayed there for another millions upon millions of years, doing nothing. And that just makes me, makes me want to shake Charles Atlas by the hand. Name that musical. When in just 7 days, I will make you a man. It's Rocky Horror. Anyway, okay, look, this really is too boring to do on camera, so I will stop. Oh, it's pressing all the buttons and starting them again. Why don't you just do it, Sam, and it will all be done soon. But what are you going to listen to anyway, Sam? Yeah, you're right. What am I going to listen to? I'll just keep it running. I can't be bothered to stop the cameras. Honestly, can't. So you've got the luxury of listening to 20 minutes of... And somebody once said, oh, but you're doing it all wrong with your fingers there. It's all uneven. It's a little thing I do. I like to do it with my fingers first time round. Is that okay? Will you permit me that little luxury? God, I realise I sounded like Elizabeth Taylor in Antony and Cleopatra. No, well, Cleopatra was the film. I had that tone that she has in her voice. Anyway, yeah, so the moon landings, man. Oh, brilliant. Loved it from ever since then onwards. And then years later, when the internet first came round, I somebody turned me on to Eric Jones's Lunar Surface Apollo Surface Journal, which is an absolutely monstrously rich and deep archive of all things, all the original raw stills from all the Apollo surface moon landings. And when you go there, find that, and you go there, you can get completely lost. Looking at every single photo, one after another, all the Hasselblad pictures on the Apollo 15, 16, 17. I think, yeah, absolutely amazing. I think that the stuff that really mind-blowing, you know, when you kind of, if you grew up in the 60s, you were sort of used to, and to this day people are used to the grainy, sort of almost translucent TV footage from the moon. But it's when you see the, I don't know, what is it, the 70mm Hasselblad or movie, I think it's Hasselblad, movie footage taken on the lunar rover. Unbelievable. That's when you feel you're there. That's when the true majesty of the whole situation, the distance from Earth, the sheer massive scale of the achievement. Not one of us now, I mean almost none of us on this planet, so few of us have gone so far from the planet that our Earth looks like a little marble in the sky. That must have been the most awe-inspiring experience. I just can't imagine how fantastic that would be. I was always a science fiction fan as well. Spent a lot of my childhood putting my head in sci-fi magazines and books. So I was right primed and ready for Star Wars when it arrived. Perfect timing. Yeah, when it came out, I think I was 77, wasn't it? I was 14 and in school in Coventry. I just moved there. After the years of being fostered, my dad got himself in a position where he felt that he could take on his two teenage boys. It was a pretty tough undertaking for any bloke, but anyway, to his credit, he tried and it didn't work out very well. Teenage boys in the 70s who weren't exactly easy to manage, but anyway, we moved up from our foster home in Sleepy Devon to live in the mean streets of Coventry. We went to a Catholic school, which was rough. It was in that first year at that school, I think, that Star Wars came out, and it was just jaw-droppingly good. There were a few of us who just got into it 1000%. The sort of dreamers, you know, the kids who needed somewhere to escape. A lot of my contemporaries had football. You know, if you were good at footy, you would kind of lose yourself in that. And then there were other kids who sort of got into punk and reggae, ska, as soon as it came out, and they sort of lost themselves in that John Peel show type of dark late 70s new wave type of feeling. But I remember bringing Star Wars stuff into school and sharing it with a couple of other probably geeky sort of guys a bit like me. And we would just sort of talk through the film that we'd seen, every bit of it. I think it was even before the days when you collected figures, so we didn't have any of that stuff. We had some books with pictures, and we would swap books and loan our books to each other. But I think the other thing is that, if you remember, there's the whole theme in Star Wars, the first film, where Luke's kind of champing at the bit on, where's it, Tatooine, isn't it, with his aunt and uncle. So I think when you're 14 and living in some urban concrete jungle in the Midlands, the West Midlands, and sort of, I suppose was it the heyday of Thatcher's? No, yeah, just it was the beginning of Thatcher's era, Margaret Thatcher's era. And, so it's quite a bleak world out there, and so to see that kind of Luke Skywalker standing on the dunes, looking wistfully off into the sort of the double twin sunset of Tatooine, it was God, it was so evocative. Captured something perfectly. And some of us just wanted, that's all we wanted to be, out there on the frontiers of space, doing that stuff, fighting for the rebels in deep space against the wicked empire. I think at the time, if you had showed us sort of an American desert dream, we would have gone for that as well. Anything but the sort of mundanity of suburban life. I remember I'm trying to remember the circumstances around getting my first guitar. I sort of sometimes say it was in that period in Coventry, 79 or 80. And actually I think my first ever guitar was when I was about 6, and I had it in Falmouth when we lived there. And it was an acoustic, metal strung acoustic, probably a small one or something, but I remember having it, and like all things, I didn't know how to play it, but I could make a noise on it. I enjoyed making a noise on it. And but I had to sell up everything. We had this, my foster parents had this mad idea to take off to go and live in France forever, as you do. You're sick of it. It was a bit like The Good Life or something. I don't know. If Barbara and Tom had children, we would have been those children. And they would have taken us up to live a small holding in the south of France, which didn't work out, but as a run up to it, we kind of sold everything we possessed, including my guitar amongst other things. So that was my first guitar, and my second ever one was, I don't know what got me interested in it, but there came a time in that sort of late, I guess 78, 79, after Star Wars had come out, and I think Star had really kicked off in Coventry, and I really liked the idea of being involved in it somehow. So I think some of the kids I knew were getting into bands, and it seemed really cool thing to do. So I really wanted to get a guitar, but there was just literally no way I was going to be able to get one. I had no money, and my dad was a sort of notorious tight fist, and I asked him, I think, if he would loan me the money or give me the pocket money in advance so I could get this guitar or buy it week by week or something, and he refused outright. My pals, oh no, I haven't done the thing yet. I had a pal who I sort of was starting to get interested. We were sort of talking about playing together in some sort of band, and I think I was somehow making some music using his brother's guitar or something. And Paul persuaded his mum to, what do you call it, stand guarantor for buying a guitar on tick or on time over on her catalogue, and it was a Grattan's catalogue or some such thing that was popular in those days. And I remember kind of seeing this thing, and what I was struck by most of all was that this woman would do that for me, whereas my own dad wouldn't. And to my credit, I will say, not a lot of things I did to my credit in those days, but to my credit, I paid her back, as planned. And then eventually the guitar turned up, and it was a 3/4 sized plywood toy. Not that I really knew that much about it anyway, but a bit of a shock. I do remember noticing that it wasn't quite the right size, and somehow that didn't feel very good. But I didn't know enough to be totally embarrassed or ashamed, or I kind of got on with it. I don't quite even know how I managed to bring it home and explain it to my dad that I'd gone behind his back and enlisted the help of a friend's parents to buy this guitar, but somehow it became a fixture in my room, and I would teach myself chords using a Beatles songbook that was the official sort of proper words and chords for the Sgt. Pepper album, which my skinflint dad sold me. He didn't give me the record. We only had probably that only record in the house. No, he was a jazz pianist at times, and he had a lot of Duke Ellington and all the greats and what's her name, Ella Fitzgerald and all that stuff. But he saw that I liked the Beatles Sgt. Pepper, so he sold it to me, and I played it on the radiogram thing upstairs that I sort of had control over. And so having got into that album, I just learned to play by playing along with it, and having a book that had the chords written out. So it just it made sense. I knew the songs inside out in my head to sing, and then it was so much easier then just to kind of try and make these little chord shapes and see that I could sing along to it, which was immensely satisfying for me, not for anyone else. And I suppose, like probably a lot of us, when we're kids, we think we're going to get support from our parents, but I remember my dad telling me to shut up playing it one day, and I didn't even have an amp. I was just playing it on silent, acoustically, and he demanded I shut up playing it. So that's the support I remember. But then somewhere along the line, me and a couple of guys started to play together, and there was I think I've told this story before, but there was a band. My friend's younger brother was in a better band with kids from his year who were 1 year under us, but they were the sort of the hot band of the 5th form and 6th form, because we were in the upper 6th form. And they were great. They really were. We used to go all over the town of Coventry to watch them play in the various pubs, and at that point in our lives, going to watch Martin and Simon and their band was, for most of us in my year, it was just the invitation to go and get absolutely wasted on, what was that stuff you used to drink? Snakebite, beer and blackcurrant or something. I don't know. That's what cider. That was cider and black. No, the snakebite was cider and beer, wasn't it? And we just discovered alcohol, really, and most of us. And, so that the whole kind of time was sort of wanting to play, but spending more of my time going to these band nights where the other band would play, and just, you know, it was that sort of situation. They were so good compared to us, our efforts, that it was more demotivating than anything. Although we enjoyed supporting them, but you know, when you inevitably compared what you could do to them, it was just like, oh, what's the point? You know, they sounded like a rock band, you know, and we sounded like kids pretending to be punks, you know, who couldn't play, but that's because we're punks. No, it's because you can't play very well. So, but anyway, the other band was, you know, it was the demotivating inspiration, if you like. And I remember that there was the pivotal time, and I have it on file somewhere, a tape that got lost for years but then got found again. It's like a song. There was a gig organised for this other band, a good band, and it was in the living room of the guy, the brothers, one who was in my band and one who was in this year below good band. Anyway, both those brothers lived in this house, and this gig was lined up to happen in their living room. And it actually turned out that I ended up staying there when my relationship with my dad sort of fell apart, and he ended up trying to get me thrown out of school, keep me at home and trying to get me thrown out of school. And Paul and his family very kindly sort of rescued me at that point and gave me somewhere to stay until the end of my A-levels, which was a very kind, very, very decent human thing to do. But you know, anyway, and it, you know, I'm not blaming my dad completely, because you know, I wasn't easy to be a parent to. But anyway, so in this room that was later to become my front room for my stay there, there was this gig organised, and our band was sort of because most of them lived. Did I live there at the time? I might have even lived there at the time. So kind of since we lived there as well, we kind of by default got to be the second band on the set, you know, on the bill. So we practiced. I don't know what we did. We did some. I do know what we did. Well, I'm trying to blank it out, pretending I didn't know what we did. We played some Beatles songs. We played a Pink Floyd song, which was this was around the time that Pink Floyd, I think, had just released The Wall, and even if they hadn't, you know, Pink Floyd had all that fantastic catalogue of great stuff. But oh no, we didn't play that. We played one from Relics called Julia Dream, and it's a very wispy, sort of whimsical little, you know, that era that Pink Floyd had, with Cambridge and LSD and weird sort of experimental music. Anyway, so that was all we played. But we played I think we started with Can't Buy Me Love, which was just, and well, anyway, it was excruciating. And part of the reason it was excruciating is because we were pretty poor. You know, looking back on it now, and we were terrible, and it was, my singing was terrible, and you know, we pitched it at the miles in the wrong key. It was sort of Paul McCartney key, and so he had me there shrieking like a strangled chimp, and sort of bless the friendly school audience sort of sat through our embarrassing attempts, and we did Can't Buy Me Love, we did Julia Dream by Pink Floyd, could even call it Pink Floyd, and then we did some dirge of an instrumental thing that Paul, our keyboard player, can you imagine in the era of punk, so you've got me playing a toy satellite guitar from Japan, you know, plywood monster. You've got a keyboardist playing a Bontempi organ, which at most could make a sort of churchy, reedy sort of church organ warble, and we had a bass player, Steve, who shortly after joined the army and sodded off to live in Germany forever after. Steve playing bass and not really being able to play bass either. And so we sort of struggled on through this, all the while knowing that our efforts were just going to be dwarfed in about 5-10 minutes by this other band who were just shit hot by comparison. And so the whole thing got recorded, and the tape, I kept it for a while. I was the sort of holder of the tape for our band, and then I think it sort of went the way of all things until years later Steve over in Germany contacted me and said, hey, that gig we did at Paul's house, I've still got I've got a recording of it somewhere on tape. And so he sent it to me, and I had the absolute mispleasure of hearing it again recently, and it is awful, truly awful, but there you go, that's how things go. Now these just noticed something here, the intonation here is going to be wrong, so let's imagine, let's anticipate what it might be. There and there. Yeah, so that was our first gigging experience, and somehow, I don't know how, but we carried on even after that, to sort of grinding performance, where we were blown away immediately afterwards by the great band who just rocked it out in a way that we just couldn't manage. What we did have in between those times, we had some really nice musical get-togethers. What the band, the great thing is while you're feeling terrible about not being as good as that other band, the people who around you who are into music tend to be far less critical than you are of yourself. So I remember that while I thought I was the most useless thing in the world compared to them, they were generous, and any opportunity to sit down, come around to the homestead and play, we'd have some really great jams. And they were all based they were a kind of Irish Catholic family, and so their musical kind of roots were all based in Irish traditional music. They're all fans of the Horselips in the 70s, late 70s. They're a great Irish band, but and they were, we all had the Beatles in common and all that 60s stuff. So I remember some fabulous gigs. We all combined together to do a big gig at school once, and we played a great big acoustic gig. With Tambourine Man, all those songs. We did While My Guitar Gently Weeps, things like that. And they were kind of, they brought us up with them, sort of thing. Well, individually wouldn't have really stood up to it. Anyway, so look, I've got the new elixirs. We've got everything polished out, cleaned out. You saw we've Dremeled everything, so it's shined to a nice mirror finish. And now it's time to put on the strings, the new strings. And so let's put them on, stretch them out, and intonate them. And I just had a quick guess at the intonation there. We don't know if it's right, but we'll find out. So yeah, that was a start of playing in bands, and then I do remember somehow we still didn't give up. We did a couple of those school things, which were, in those days you seem to do weird things, like you would go from playing kind of dreamy mamas and papas and 12-string tastic birds and kinks and God knows what, and then the next thing you'd be down at some filthy dive in a pub trying to be punks or ska people or something. And I remember there was a period where we shared the members of these bands around a bit. The great guitarist in the good band, his older brother was in my year, and we somehow acquired him as our singer. and he was an extraordinary individual. He was very weird and very, very troubled and antisocial, and he eventually took his own life a couple of years after we finished school. I didn't know that until years later, but he was deeply troubled, and he would get into fights with girls, you know, in one of these nights out, or school kind of drunken nights out. But he had such a weird guy. But he was our singer for a while, and so we were kind of cranking out these angst-ridden songs, which were probably more about his personal traumas and agonies than we ever knew. We just thought they were sort of attempts at punk songs, you know. But clearly he was deeply troubled. Okay, so I want Pete, I wonder if I can do this. 2.5 hours so far. So look, what I'm going to try and demonstrate, I can't really do this with one hand, but let's okay. Here's my attempt. Right, close up. So we pull the string taut all the way up there, okay, and then change his hands on the camera, and then we take this end and we basically, I would say, we pull, oh my god, I can't even handle it, we pull this back 1 fret's worth, okay, then we start winding on, okay, if I can hold this, we start winding on, right, and we keep the held, look at this camera work, we keep the held bit straight and let the loose bit go under the held bit like that. Then as it comes around the second time, we get this bit here, crank it up, and then we press, I know you can't see this because I haven't got enough hands, right? We press this bit down and guide it under. I can't possibly do it because my hands won't do it, like that. We go under the loose bit this time. You see that? Over first time, under, and then we end up like that. And you see the way that this loose bit now is caught between these two coils. That's the worst bit of camera work you'll ever see. That's not bad. I seem to have lost the camera there. Oh well, 2 bits to this. It's probably run out of memory actually, for all I know. Okay, we're nearly there anyway, so let's just get on. So that was a quick, bad close-up. I could probably aim this thing at it and do a close-up, but let's see if I can. I'm going to try. Yes, so that was my early musical experiences, and like I say, we were truly terrible. I'm doing this back to front, so congratulate me for my innovation in this. Okay, there you go. You can see me. I'm not going to move it now. That'll be the end. Right, so we put the string all the way through, pull it taut, put it back 1 fret's worth, hold this one over the top, hold the taut one over the top of the loose one. As the loose one comes round, yank it up and put the taut one, held one under the loose one. There you go. That's it. And this will give you a minimum amount of grip, which will hold perfectly well because it's sort of self-locking, but it does it without weakening the string. Because notice how 2 of the ones that you had tied with the little loopy arrangement broke. One broke when I was stretching it, and the other one broke when I was trying to just undo it. So it's clear that that loop thing puts a crimp point on the strings. This doesn't do that. This just holds them on nicely. And then we'll cut them all short after that, so nobody gets any stings from the string jellyfish of life. Okay. So notice I also tightened up the tuners here. It's one of the things you get with guitars when you buy them new, and I'm not sure, I can't remember if, I think Pete bought this new from Manson's. You buy the guitar new, and if the finish is still slightly setting, whatever that means, you'll find that even the tiniest bit of shrinkage of that finish will leave your tuners suddenly free to turn finger tight, or less than finger tight. It's amazing how little shrinkage you need before that happens. I've often found this making my own guitars. When I spray them with something like nitro cellulose, 6 months later I can almost guarantee that the tuners will be loose, because it doesn't take much to loosen them. It doesn't take much shrinkage of the finish to leave them loose. So. Okay, so there we go. So that's the stringed. I'm going to cut back as tight as I can. When I cut back really tight like this, sometimes you have to be very careful that if the loose end is anywhere near the tight length of this plain length of the string, you need to slack it off again so you don't end up with any risk of chopping the good string with when you're cutting the stump off. I've done it before and it's a very depressing thing to do, I can promise you. Not to mention expensive. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a bit of a sort of gentle tug on here, get everything firmly bedded in. Didn't realise I've got Pete's the details sitting down there. Don't mean I'm going to have to put a pixelation thing on here. It's a sticker, might be. Oh, it's a card. Very cool. Okay, so we get an A. So light. So light by comparison. Right, so recommend you do this every time you, oh sorry, let's just change the zoom. Sorry, that was a zoom error. Sorry, zoom out. Oh dear, that's weird. Oh, we don't want that. Something like that. And you to 1. There's 1 there, something like that. Okay. Yes. So when you do this, put the string and thumb, finger and thumb, stretch the strings between fingers and thumb to get as much slack out of it all the way down its plain length as you can. You do the same on every string. And this will be your route towards stretching the strings out. You might need to do this 3 or 4 times, followed by some pulls and some bends before you stabilise the strings. And remember that the strings are going to pop out at the slot as well. But this is now, what I really don't want to do is to break any of these elixirs because I don't have any more. So, more stretchings, let's keep on going. The more you do, you really want to do it until there's no more detuning. That's the main thing you're aiming for. Because if you don't, there's still more detuning to be had. And the truth is that detuning will come out during your playing. Yeah, so anyway, that was my music career. And I remember doing at least one, I can't remember, I think it was only one, possibly more gig at a club, a really dark and depressing pub in Coventry called the Coventry Climax, I think it was called, which is named after the engine, not the pastime. Well, it wasn't for a lack of want of trying. And we played there, and with Dennis, our singer, bashing out such classic tunes as The Way of the World and Kill My Ego was a pleasantly cheery one. And they were just grindingly unmusical songs. Actually, funny thing is I tried to be punk and unmusical and still ended up being more musical than we really wanted to be. It was hard not to be. The problem is that we were born and raised on a diet of the Beatles and beautiful melodies and sweet harmonies and stuff. And we couldn't be punk if we tried. We just weren't, you know. Although we knew it was the thing to be, because that's what the really cool kids were being. They were either being punk or they were being a sort of new age reggae meets punk type of thing. You know, the Police. Or something with a bit, a bit of an edge, but we just couldn't do it. We were too soft and musical. Okay, so for intonation, I'm gonna tune to the harmonic ping on the 12th fret. And then play a fretted note. Now the idea is that the fretted note, fretted 12th note, or the 12th fret, should be the same as the pinged harmonic, the 12th. Not far off, actually. The G is a bit sharp. G is a bit sharp. Well, really? Is it really a bit sharp? I don't think so. But we'll take it at its word and we'll hold it back a fraction. Nice. pretty good. I'm happy with that. Yeah, what time is it? Oh, I suppose I know, do I? Since everything's used up doing camera work. What time is it? Any chance of telling me the time? No. Volume, information. No. Look at that. I can't even get the time from my DAB radio. Right. Let's have one listen, a quick listen to this. Let's have a little quick listen, just to make sure. But there we have it. Much lower action than before. But the strings, well, the saddle's still quite high up on their little haunches, but that's the not really much choice. Failing that, the only thing we really could do is take down the neck pocket a fraction. Oh yikes. Why does it always come on? I don't want it on that and all that. I just want clean tone. I like. Nice. Of course, it's, it has a lower action than the Fender made in Japan Fender that I just finished just before this, because of course this has got a much flatter radius than the made in Japan Fender, so it's going to work. It's going to have a lower action. Okay, there we go. That is Pete's classic Tele Cort. Great guitars, Cort. Can't fault them. It's a really good guitar. Okay, thanks for watching. See you again soon. He goes around switching everything off. Switch everything off. 252. Good Lord. 252. Yep, 252.